The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. His SEAL team had been moving through the valley since before dawn, their mission clear but dangerous. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target was hiding in a compound just 2 kilometers ahead, and they had a narrow window to capture him before he disappeared again. Morrison's team consisted of 5 elite operators, each handpicked for this mission. There was Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, the team's heavy weapons specialist whose calm demeanor under fire had saved countless lives. Petty Officer First Class David "Ghost" Chun moved like his nickname suggested, silent and deadly, specializing in reconnaissance and close-quarters combat. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy "Doc" Williams served as their medic, but his skills with a rifle matched his ability to save lives. Finally, there was Petty Officer Third Class Ryan "Rookie" Patterson, the youngest member of the team, eager to prove himself but still learning the harsh realities of special operations. As they approached the target area, Ghost raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. He had spotted something through his scope that made his blood run cold. The entire approach to the compound was littered with anti-personnel mines, their metallic surfaces barely visible in the morning light. What should have been a straightforward assault had just become a deadly puzzle. "Boss, we got a problem," Ghost whispered into his radio, his voice barely audible even to the team members just meters away. "The whole area is mined. I count at least 20 devices in our immediate path, and that's just what I can see from here." Morrison studied the terrain through his binoculars, his mind racing through possible alternatives. The compound sat on elevated ground, surrounded by steep cliffs on 3 sides. The only viable approach was through the minefield they now faced. Retreat wasn't an option either, as enemy forces had been spotted moving in from behind, likely attempting to cut off their escape route. "How much time do we have before the backup arrives?" Tank asked, adjusting the grip on his machine gun. His question hung in the air like the dust kicked up by the mountain wind. "Intel says 30 minutes, maybe less," Morrison replied, his jaw set in determination. "But that was based on our original timeline. We're already behind schedule." Doc scanned the surrounding hills through his scope, searching for alternative routes. "I don't see any other way up there, boss. Those cliffs are nearly vertical, and even if we could climb them, we'd be sitting ducks." The team had trained for mine situations before, but never in a scenario where time was this critical and escape routes this limited. Standard mine-clearing procedures would take hours, not minutes. They needed a miracle, or, at the very least, someone who understood the specific pattern these mines have been laid in. Rookie fidgeted with his equipment, the weight of his first real combat mission pressing down on him like the Afghan sun. "What if we call for air support? Maybe they could clear a path." Morrison shook his head. "Negative. The target would hear the aircraft coming from miles away. By the time we reached the compound, it would be empty." He paused, considering their dwindling options. Besides, close air support in a minefield is just as likely to set off every device in the area. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the valley, confirming Morrison's worst fears. The enemy forces behind them were closing in faster than expected. They were trapped between a minefield they couldn't cross and hostile forces they couldn't outrun. Ghost continued his careful observation of the minefield, looking for any pattern or safe passage that might exist. "Boss, these aren't randomly placed. There's definitely a system here, but I can't figure it out from this distance." Tank checked his ammunition supply and positioned himself to cover their rear. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide fast. I'm starting to hear movement behind us, and it's getting closer." The weight of command pressed heavily on Morrison's shoulders. Every decision he made in the next few minutes would determine whether his team completed their mission or became casualties in a foreign land. The high-value target they were pursuing had information that could save American lives, but getting to him seemed impossible without sacrificing the lives of his own men. "Doc, what's your assessment of those mines?" Morrison asked, hoping his medic's technical knowledge might provide some insight. "From what I can see, they look like Soviet-era PMN-2s, possibly mixed with some newer devices. They're pressure-activated, so even a light step could set them off. The blast radius is about 5 meters, which means even if we spot one, we might trigger others nearby. The situation grew more desperate by the minute. Morrison could hear the enemy forces getting closer, their voices carrying on the wind. Soon they would be in visual range, and the SEAL team would be caught in crossfire with nowhere to run. There has to be someone in this area who knows the pattern, Go said suddenly, lowering his scope. These mines didn't lay themselves. Whoever placed them had to have a way to navigate through safely. Morrison nodded, understanding Ghost's logic. Local knowledge. Someone in the nearby villages might know how to get through. But even as he said it, he knew they didn't have time to search for such a person. The enemy was too close, and their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The team crouched behind a collection of large rocks, their temporary cover providing little comfort against the mounting pressure of their situation. Each man understood the gravity of what they faced. They had trained for years to handle impossible situations, but this felt different. This felt like a trap with no escape. As if summoned by their desperation, a figure appeared on the ridge above them. At first, they couldn't make out details through the heat shimmer rising from the rocks, but as the person moved closer, they realized it was a woman. She moved with confidence across terrain that should have been impossible to navigate safely, picking her way through what they now realized was an even more extensive minefield than they had originally thought. The woman who appeared on the ridge above them moved with an almost supernatural grace across the dangerous terrain. She wore traditional Afghan clothing, a faded blue burqa that had seen better days, but her movement suggested someone far younger and more agile than the elderly village women they had encountered before. Each step she took seemed calculated and precise, as if she knew exactly where every deadly device lay hidden beneath the rocky ground. Morrison signaled for his team to remain still and observe. Ghost trained his scope on the approaching figure, trying to determine if she posed a threat. She's definitely local, but there's something different about her, he whispered. The way she's moving, it's like she has a map in her head. The woman stopped approximately 50 meters from their position, close enough that they could see her clearly, but far enough away that any sudden movement wouldn't immediately put her in danger. She called out to them in accented English, her voice carrying clearly across the rocky landscape. American soldiers, you are in great danger. The men who hunt you will be here soon, and you cannot go forward or backward safely. Tank kept his weapon trained on the surrounding area while Doc and Rookie maintained watch on their rear approach. The sound of pursuing enemy forces was growing steadily louder, and Morrison estimated they had perhaps 15 minutes before contact. Who are you? Morrison called back, his rifle ready, but not aimed directly at her. How do we know you're not working with the people chasing us? The woman laughed, a sound that seemed out of place in such a deadly situation. If I worked for them, I would not warn you of the mines that surround you on all sides. I would simply wait for you to step on one and then collect whatever remained. Ghost studied the terrain around their position with new understanding. Boss, she's right. I'm seeing more metallic reflections now that I know what to look for. We're sitting in the middle of a minefield that's much larger than we thought. Morrison felt his stomach tighten as the full scope of their predicament became clear. They weren't just blocked by mines to their front, they were surrounded by them. Somehow, in their rush to reach the target area, they had walked directly into an elaborate trap. My name is Zura, the woman continued, moving slightly closer but still maintaining a safe distance. My father was the one who placed these mines 3 years ago during the fighting between the Taliban and the Northern Alliance. He taught me the pattern before he died. Doc looked up from his medical supplies, where he had been quietly preparing for potential casualties. How do we know you're telling the truth? This could be a setup to get us to trust you. Zara responded by taking several steps directly toward them, her path winding in a seemingly random pattern between invisible threats. With each step, she came closer to their position, demonstrating an intimate knowledge of the safe passages through the deadly maze. Because, she said as she approached, if I wanted you dead, I would simply wait. The men following you are not as patient as I am, and They do not know about the mines either. When they arrive, many of them will die, but some will survive, and they will kill any of you who are still alive. Morrison made a quick decision. They were running out of time, and this mysterious woman represented their only apparent chance of escape. All right, Zura, assuming you can get us through this minefield, what do you want in return? I want you to take me with you when you leave this place, she replied without hesitation. My village is gone, destroyed in the fighting. My family is dead except for my younger brother, who is hiding in the caves near the compound you seek. If you can help me reach him, I will guide you safely through the mines and show you a secret entrance to your target's location. Ghost lowered his scope and looked at Morrison with raised eyebrows. Boss, she's offering us exactly what we need. A way through the minefield and intelligence on the target area. Tang's voice carried a note of skepticism as he continued to monitor their rear. It's too convenient. How does she know about our mission? How does she know we're heading for that specific compound? Zara overheard Tang's concerns and addressed them directly. The man you seek has been using my village's children as human shields and forced labor. Word travels quickly in these mountains about American soldiers who hunt such men. We have been hoping someone would come. The sound of voices in the distance grew more distinct, confirming that their pursuers were indeed getting closer. Morrison estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before enemy forces would be within visual range of their position. Here's what we're going to do, Morrison announced to his team. Zara, you're going to guide us through this minefield to a position where we can either reach the compound or find better defensive ground. In exchange, we'll extract you and help you find your brother. But boss, Rookie interjected, what if she's leading us into a trap? What if the safe path she knows isn't really safe? Zara smiled beneath her burqa, and Morrison could see intelligence and determination in her dark eyes. Young soldier, if the path I take is not safe, then I will be the first to die. Does that answer your question? Doc finished his preparations and shouldered his medical pack. It's the best option we have. Staying here means certain death when those hostiles arrive. Morrison nodded and gestured for his team to prepare to move. Zara, I need you to understand something. If this is a trap, if you're leading us into an ambush, my men will not hesitate to do what's necessary. Understand, she replied solemnly. But you must also understand that the path through the mines requires absolute trust and precise movement. One mistake, one moment of doubt or hesitation, and we all die together. Ghost packed his spotting scope and checked his weapon. How long will it take to get through? To reach safe ground near the compound, perhaps 20 minutes if we move carefully. To reach the entrance I know about, another 10 minutes after that. Tank grimaced as he looked back toward the approaching enemy forces. That's cutting it really close. Those guys behind us are moving faster than I'd like. Zara began walking back toward the minefield, her movements once again displaying the careful precision they had observed before. Then we must begin now. Follow exactly in my footsteps, and do not deviate even slightly from the path I take. The mines here are old, but still deadly, and some of them are connected to others. Morrison took point behind Zara, followed by Ghost, then Doc, Rookie, and Tank bringing up the rear. As they began their deadly journey through the minefield, each man understood that their lives now depended entirely on the knowledge and goodwill of a woman they had met just minutes before. The first few steps were the most terrifying, as Morrison forced himself to trust completely in Zara's guidance. Behind him, he could hear his team's breathing, steady and controlled despite the extreme stress of their situation. Each footfall required absolute faith, and one mistake would mean death not just for the person who triggered a mine, but potentially for the entire team. As they moved deeper into the minefield, the sounds of their pursuers grew more distant, but Morrison knew this was only temporary. Soon, the enemy would reach the edge of the minefield themselves, and then the real test would begin. Following Zara through the minefield proved to be one of the most nerve-wracking experiences any of the SEAL team members had ever endured. Each step required absolute concentration and trust, as even a slight deviation from her exact path could trigger an explosion that would kill them all. The woman moved with an almost dancing grace, her steps creating a winding pattern that seemed to make no logical sense to the trained soldiers following behind her. Morrison found himself studying her movements intently, trying to understand the system her father had used when laying the mines. Sometimes she would take 3 steps forward, then 2 steps to the left, then 1 step back before continuing forward again. Other times, she would walk in what appeared to be a straight line for 20 meters before suddenly veering sharply to the right around an invisible obstacle. "How much further?" Ghost whispered, his voice barely audible even though they were moving in single file, just meters apart. Zara paused and pointed toward a cluster of rocks about 100 meters ahead. "Once we reach those boulders, we will be through the worst of it. From there, the path to the compound is easier, but we must still be careful." Behind them, the pursuing enemy forces had reached the edge of the minefield. The SEAL team could hear shouting and confusion as their pursuers discovered the deadly obstacles that blocked their advance. Several voices were arguing about the safest way forward, and Morrison realized that Zara had been correct about the enemy not knowing the mine pattern. Tank, bringing up the rear, reported what he could see behind them. "Looks like they're smart enough not to just charge through. They're spreading out, probably looking for a way around or trying to spot the safe path we're taking." Doc carefully placed his feet in Zara's exact footsteps, his medical training making him acutely aware of how devastating a mine blast would be to the human body. "How did your father remember all these patterns? This is incredibly complex." Zara continued moving, but answered over her shoulder. "He was a mathematics teacher before the war came to our village. He said that placing mines randomly was wasteful and dangerous even for those who laid them. So he created a system based on numbers that were important to our family. Birth dates, anniversaries, the number of stones in the walls of our home." Rookie stumbled slightly, his foot sliding on loose gravel, and the entire team held their breath as he regained his balance. "Sorry," he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "Be more careful," Zara warned gently. "The mines here are very sensitive, and some of them have been damaged by weather and time. They may explode, even for vibrations in the ground nearby." Morrison checked his watch and calculated their progress. They had been moving through the minefield for 12 minutes, which meant they were making good time despite the careful pace. However, he could see that some of their pursuers had begun probing the edges of the minefield, testing for safe passages. "Zara, what happens when we reach the compound? You mentioned a secret entrance. My brother discovered it while hiding from the Taliban fighters. There is a drainage tunnel that leads directly under the main building. It was built during Soviet times when this place was used as a supply depot." Ghost's head snapped up with interest. "A tunnel? How big? Can we all fit through it?" "It is large enough for grown men, but you must crawl for about 50 meters. My brother is small, so it was easier for him, but I think your soldiers can manage." As they approached the cluster of rocks Zara had indicated, the terrain began to change. The loose gravel gave way to more solid stone, and Morrison could see that they were approaching the base of the compound's outer defenses. The building itself sat on a rocky outcropping about 200 meters ahead, its walls built into the natural stone formations. Tank reported more activity behind them. "Boss, they're definitely trying to follow our path. I can see at least 3 guys stepping where we stepped, but they're moving really slowly." "Good," Morrison replied. "The slower they move, the more time we have to complete our mission." Zara led them around the cluster of boulders and then gestured for them to stop. "From here, the mines are fewer, but there are other dangers. The compound has guards, and they patrol this area regularly. We must move quietly now." The team took a moment to catch their breath and reassess their situation. They were no longer in immediate danger from the mines, but they were also much closer to their target, which meant the risk of detection had increased significantly. Doc checked his equipment and prepared for the possibility of treating gunshot wounds. "Zara, tell us about the defenses around this compound. How many men are we looking at?" "Usually there are 8 to 10 fighters, but today there may be more. The man you seek has been expecting trouble ever since word spread that Americans were operating in this region. Ghost studied the compound through his scope, identifying potential threats and planning their approach route. I can see 2 guards on the main wall, and there's probably a sentry in that tower position. The entrance Zara mentioned would definitely be our best option. Morrison made the decision to proceed with their original plan, but modified for their new circumstances. Here's what we're going to do. Zara will guide us to this tunnel entrance, and Ghost will provide overwatch while the rest of us enter the compound. Once we secure the target, we'll extract through the same tunnel. What about the people chasing us? Rookie asked, glancing back toward the minefield. They're going to figure out our path eventually. Zara smiled grimly. Perhaps, but by then, we will be inside the compound, and they will have to deal with the guards who are already there. Let our enemies fight each other while we complete our mission. The sound of an explosion echoed across the valley, followed by screaming and shouting. One of their pursuers had apparently triggered a mine while trying to follow their path through the dangerous area. Tank nodded approvingly. That should slow them down considerably. Nobody wants to be the second guy to step on a mine. Morrison felt a surge of confidence as their plan began to come together. They had successfully navigated the most dangerous part of their mission, and now they had both local intelligence and a tactical advantage over their pursuers. All right, let's move toward this tunnel entrance. Zara, stay close to me and keep your head down. Once we start moving toward the compound, we're committed to this course of action. As they began their approach to the compound, Morrison reflected on the remarkable turn of events that had transformed their desperate situation into a viable mission. The woman who had appeared seemingly from nowhere had not only saved their lives, but provided them with exactly the intelligence they needed to complete their objective. However, he also remained cautious about trusting someone they knew so little about. In his experience, situations that seemed too good to be true often were, and he was prepared for the possibility that Zara's true motives might not align with theirs. The tunnel entrance that Zara led them to was almost impossible to spot, hidden behind a carefully arranged pile of rocks that looked completely natural. Only when she moved several stones aside did the dark opening become visible, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through on his hands and knees. My brother discovered this when he was running from the Taliban fighters last month, Zara explained quietly. He was small enough to explore it fully, but I have only been partway inside. Ghost examined the tunnel entrance with his tactical flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid detection from the compound above. It looks solid enough, and I can feel air movement, which means it definitely connects to something on the other side. Morrison studied their approach route one more time, noting the guard positions and patrol patterns he could observe. How long to crawl through to the other side? For men your size, perhaps 10 minutes if you move carefully. The tunnel goes down first, then levels out, then rises up into the basement of the main building. Doc checked his medical supplies and redistributed some equipment to make crawling easier. What's the layout inside the building? Do we know where our target is likely to be? Zara's expression grew more serious. The man you seek stays in the upper rooms during the day because they're easier to defend. But my brother told me that there are always guards in the basement, at least 2 men with automatic weapons. Tank nodded grimly. So we'll be crawling into a potential ambush situation. Not ideal, but we've dealt with worse. Morrison made the tactical decision to alter their approach based on this new information. Change of plans. Ghost, you'll stay here to provide overwatch and cover our exit. Tank, you'll go through first to secure the basement. Doc, you'll follow Tank with Rookie behind you. I'll bring up the rear with Zara. Boss, I should go first, Doc protested. If there are guards in that basement, Tank's going to need immediate medical support available. Negative. Tank has the best close-quarters combat experience, and he's the most likely to neutralize threats quickly and quietly. Time is critical here. Ghost took up a position where he could observe both the compound and the minefield behind them. I'm seeing movement back there. Looks like our friends are still trying to work their way through the mines, but they're being really cautious about it. Tank removed some of his heavier equipment and prepared for the crawl through the tunnel. How do we communicate once I'm inside? These walls are going to block radio signals. We'll use rope signals, Morrison replied, producing a length of climbing rope from his pack. 1 pull means all clear, 2 pulls means threats neutralized, 3 pulls means abort, and extract immediately. Zara watched their preparations with growing anxiety. You must remember that my brother is somewhere in this building. He is only 14 years old, and he'll be frightened. Please do not mistake him for an enemy. Morrison paused in his equipment check to look directly at her. Describe your brother. Height, clothing, any distinguishing features that will help us identify him quickly. He is small for his age, maybe as tall as your chest. He has a scar above his left eyebrow from when we escaped our village. He wears a brown shirt and dark pants, and he carries a small knife that belonged to our father. Doc memorized the description carefully. We'll do everything we can to keep him safe, but you have to understand that in a combat situation, we might not have time for careful identification. Understand, but please try. Tank began his crawl into the tunnel, the rope tied around his waist feeding out slowly as he progressed. The tunnel was even narrower than it had appeared from the outside, and he had to remove his helmet to fit through some sections. The darkness was absolute, forcing him to rely on his tactical flashlight for navigation. Behind him, the rest of the team waited anxiously for his signal. Ghost continued to monitor the surrounding area, reporting that their pursuers had made little progress through the minefield, but were showing signs of trying to find an alternate route. Ghost, how long before they might reach us by going around the minefield? Morrison asked. Hard to say, boss. If they stick to the high ground, maybe 45 minutes to an hour. If they try to find a path through the valley, could be longer but more dangerous for them. Tank's voice came through the radio, faint but clear. I'm about halfway through. The tunnel is stable, but it's really tight in some places. I can see light ahead, which means I'm getting close to the other end. Doc prepared to follow, checking that his medical equipment was secured and wouldn't make noise during the crawl. Zara, once we're all inside, where should we look for your brother? He said he was hiding in the upper rooms, away from where the guards usually stay. There are small storage areas under the roof where a child could hide easily. Morrison felt the rope pulse once, indicating that Tank had reached the end of the tunnel safely. A few moments later, it pulsed twice, meaning he had neutralized the basement guards without raising an alarm. Doc, go. Rookie, follow him immediately. Maintain radio silence unless there's an emergency. As Doc began his crawl through the tunnel, Morrison turned to Zara with a serious expression. I need you to understand something. Once we're inside that building, the situation could become very dangerous very quickly. If I tell you to do something, you need to do it immediately without question. I understand. I'm not a soldier, but I am not helpless either. I have survived 3 years of war in these mountains. Ghost reported new movement from their rear position. Boss, I think our pursuers are splitting up. Some of them are still trying to get through the minefield, but I see another group moving up the ridge line. They might be trying to get a better view of the compound. Morrison felt the rope signal indicating that Doc had reached the basement safely. A moment later, it signaled again for Rookie to begin his crawl. The operation was proceeding smoothly, but Morrison knew that the most dangerous part was still ahead. Zara, when we get inside, I want you to guide us directly to where you think your brother is hiding. No detours, no stops to look at anything else. We grab him, we grab our target, and we get out. The man you seek, he is very dangerous. He has killed many people in my village, including children. If you give me the chance, I will kill him myself. Morrison looked into her eyes and saw a depth of hatred and pain that reminded him why they were here. This wasn't just a military operation. It was personal for Zara in ways that his team could never fully understand. I understand your feelings, but we need him alive. He has information that could save a lot of lives, and dead men don't talk. The rope pulsed twice, indicating that Rookie had successfully joined Tank and Doc in the basement. It was now Morrison's turn to enter the tunnel, with Zara following behind him. As he began the claustrophobic crawl through the narrow passage, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much more complicated than a simple capture mission. Morrison emerged from the tunnel into a dimly lit basement that reeked of mold and gunpowder. Tank and Doc had positioned themselves at the base of a narrow staircase, while Rookie covered the tunnel entrance. Two Taliban fighters lay motionless on the floor, eliminated silently by Tank's expert close-quarters combat skills. Zara crawled out behind Morrison, her eyes immediately adjusting to the darkness as she oriented herself within the building she had only heard described by her brother. The basement was larger than expected, with several rooms branching off from the main area, and Morrison realized that finding one small boy in this maze could take precious time they didn't have. "Which way?" Morrison whispered to Zura, gesturing toward the staircase and the various doorways leading deeper into the basement level. "Up," she replied without hesitation. "My brother said the guards stay down here, but the important people live in the upper rooms where they can see anyone approaching." Tank took point on the staircase, his weapon ready as he slowly advanced step by step. The wooden stairs creaked ominously under his weight, and each sound seemed amplified in the tense silence of the building. Doc followed close behind, with Morrison and Zara in the middle, and Rookie maintaining rear security. As they reached the top of the stairs, they found themselves in a narrow hallway with doors on both sides. Through one of the open doorways, they could hear voices speaking in rapid Pashto, too fast and distant for Morrison to understand, but Zara's expression grew tense as she listened. "They know someone is in the building," she whispered urgently. "They're saying that the guards in the basement are not answering their radio calls." Morrison hand-signaled to his team, indicating that they needed to move faster before their presence was fully discovered. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage, and they were rapidly losing it. Tank moved toward the room where the voices were coming from, but Zara grabbed Morrison's arm and shook her head vigorously. "Not that way. That is where the fighters gather. The man you seek will be in the corner room at the end of the hall, and my brother should be somewhere above us." The sound of footsteps overhead confirmed that there were indeed people on the upper floor of the building. Morrison made a split-second decision to divide his already small force, something that went against his training but seemed necessary given their circumstances. "Tank, take that room with the voices. Doc, go with him. Rookie, you're with me, and Zara. We're going after the high-value target and the boy." Before Tank could object to the plan, gunfire erupted from the room at the end of the hall. Someone inside had spotted them and opened fire with an automatic weapon, sending bullets ricocheting off the stone walls and filling the narrow hallway with deadly fragments. Morrison pushed Zara to the floor and returned fire while Tank and Doc moved to flank the shooter's position. The confined space made every shot thunderously loud, and Morrison knew that stealth was no longer an option. Speed and aggression were now their only hope of completing the mission. "Rookie, covering fire," Morrison shouted over the noise of the gunfight. "We need to get to that corner room." As Rookie laid down suppressing fire, Morrison and Zara low-crawled along the hallway floor toward their objective. Behind them, Tank and Doc had engaged multiple targets in the side room, and Morrison could hear the distinctive sound of Tank's machine gun mixed with the sharper cracks of enemy AK-47s. Zara suddenly stopped and pointed toward a narrow staircase Morrison hadn't noticed before. "My brother." I can hear him calling for help. Over the noise of the firefight, Morrison strained to hear what had caught Zara's attention. There, barely audible above the gunfire, was the sound of a young voice calling out in what sounded like Pashto mixed with English. "Help me. Please, someone help me." Morrison faced an impossible choice. His mission was to capture the high-value target, but Zara's brother was clearly in immediate danger somewhere upstairs. Splitting up further would leave both groups vulnerable, but trying to do both missions simultaneously might result in failure of both. "Zara, can you get to your brother by yourself? I need to get the target before he escapes or destroys intelligence materials." "Yes, but you must promise me that if the man you seek tries to surrender, you will remember what he has done to my people." Morrison nodded grimly and handed her Rookie's backup pistol. "Go get your brother. We'll handle the target." As Zara disappeared up the narrow staircase, Morrison and Rookie continued their advance toward the corner room. The gunfire from their position had stopped, which could mean either that the shooter was reloading or that he was preparing a more deadly surprise. Tang's voice came through the radio, barely audible over the continued fighting in the side room. "Boss, we've got 4 hostiles down, but I think there are more upstairs. Doc's working on a wounded civilian who is being held in here." Morrison reached the door to the corner room and prepared to make entry. Through the partially open door, he could see movement and hear someone speaking urgently into a radio, probably calling for reinforcements or try and coordinate with the forces still trapped in the minefield. "Rookie flashbang in 3 seconds, then we go in hard and fast." The explosion of the stun grenade was deafening in the confined space, but Morrison and Rookie were moving before the sound had fully faded. They burst through the doorway to find their high-value target temporarily blinded and disoriented, reaching for a weapon on a nearby table. "Drop it! Get on the ground now!" Morrison shouted, his rifle trained on the man's center mass. The target, a heavy-set man with a thick beard and expensive-looking clothing, raised his hands slowly but continued speaking into his radio in rapid Pashto. Morrison could see documents and electronic equipment scattered around the room, exactly the kind of intelligence materials they had hoped to capture intact. Rookie secured the prisoner while Morrison gathered up the documents and electronic devices. Through the window, he could see movement in the courtyard below as more Taliban fighters arrived, apparently having found an alternate route around the minefield. "Boss," Tang's voice crackled through the radio, "we've got company coming up the main staircase. Looks like the cavalry has arrived, and they're not happy about finding their friends dead." Morrison realized that their extraction through the tunnel was no longer viable. Too many enemy forces were now aware of their presence, and the basement would be the first place they would look for intruders. From somewhere above them, Morrison heard Zara calling out triumphantly, "I found him! I have my brother!" But their moment of success was short-lived as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the building. The remaining Taliban forces were conducting a systematic search, and it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Morrison made another critical decision that would determine whether they all survive the next few minutes. "Everyone extract to the roof. We're calling for air support and getting out of here the hard way." As they fought their way upstairs with their prisoner and the rescued boy, Morrison reflected on how a mission that had seemed impossible just hours ago had been transformed by the courage and knowledge of one woman who had risked everything to help strangers. The minefield that had nearly trapped them had become their salvation, and the local knowledge they had desperately needed had appeared just when all hope seemed lost. But the mission wasn't over yet, and Morrison knew that the most dangerous part of any operation was often the extraction. As they reached the roof and called for emergency pickup, with enemy forces closing in from all directions, he realized that their survival would depend on the same combination of skill, luck, and trust that had brought them this far.